the big impact here, in case you've missed it in the flurry of words that have happened over the last 8 minutes. If you're a Cumulus Networks user, you don't have access to new Broadcom platforms going forward. I think Cumulus Linux support stops at, I've lost track of the version, 7.2 or something like that. I probably have the version wrong. And going forward, there is no more support for Broadcom on Cumulus Linux. So if you invested in that ecosystem, if you're a Whitebox user with Cumulus Linux, Broadcom's not available to you. You're needing to go to Mellanox hardware, which is a burn for a lot of folks that did that investment. We got an email from someone who said, look, we made the switch. We had to do a big sell internally to get off of the, I don't know if they were Cisco, Juniper, whatever they were, but some kind of a traditional networking stack to move over to Cumulus Linux. We did that. We bought the Broadcom switches and put Cumulus Linux on them, and it's been good, but now this has happened, and it's like, well, crap, now what do we do? And they're talking about going back to the way things were. So if you're a service provider or a cloud provider, well, that's one thing. You can make these adjustments. This isn't the end of the world for you. But if you're one of the enterprises, you don't have as many NOS choices as a service provider does. Cumulus Linux is one of the companies that was catering to you for your enterprise-specific needs. Do you just say screw disaggregation? Do you say screw Whitebox at this point, Tom?
You know, this is a really weird problem that a lot of folks have, because I look at a lot like the multi-cloud problem that we see a lot in the other industries. Well, I don't want to be beholden to AWS. I don't want to be beholden to Azure, but I'm going to make a whole bunch of choices that are going to get me stuck there anyway. So, you know, I respect the folks at Cumulus. They built it on an industry standard platform. They tried to, you know, cater to a lot of different people. But that's one of the problems that you run into when you get acquired, either directly or indirectly, as the case was with Cumulus. As soon as you pick a friend, everybody else hates you because you buddied up with somebody. So they're going to start playing these games. And we've seen this for years, going all the way back to Microsoft. And it's like, oh, wait, we own an Office suite now? Guess what? OmniPro and WordPerfect aren't going to work quite as well as they used to. You know, sometimes you have to have somebody step in to fix the problem. And I use the quotey fingers there because we don't really fix problems. We just move them down the road. I think the problem that you're going to run into is as people start dumping support for Cumulus, in order for Broadcom to adopt things the way that they want to, they're going to have to either buy another company, or they are going to have to loosely partner with a company like, I don't know, what would we want, like DriveNets or Arcus or something. Actually, Arcus would be my best bet if I was going to put money on it. And I'll disclaim this, even though I'm an analyst, I have absolutely no inside bets on any of this stuff. But Arcus seems to be the horse that is going with Broadcom. And if I was Broadcom shopping for a horse, there's what I would do.
Well, I think the thing that most people aren't thinking of here is that Broadcom's key customers aren't enterprises. It's the mega clouds, right? So your AWS, your Microsoft, your you know, there's the Chinese clouds, there's the tier 2 clouds, and they're all looking at Broadcom from the perspective that that's the established chip, so we'll just go with that. But the flip side now is that Cumulus, or I would imagine that NVIDIA was hoping that they'd be able to ride Cumulus Linux and Mellanox into some of those accounts and start getting them to see Mellanox as a white box.
Yeah, here's the problem I have with that, though. Maybe if you're moving down cloud, like Google, not Amazon, Google, Azure, way down the list, Oracle. I'm worried about Amazon, and here's why. Amazon is basically Facebook. Screw it, we're going to build our own switches. And there is a lot of problem that's come in this. There was a news article that came out a couple of weeks ago about Marvell basically canceling one of their server ARM architectures. Why? Well, it turns out that the company they wanted to sell it to is building their own stuff. If I was Broadcom, and by extension Mellanox, that's what I'd be worried about. Not that they're going to pick the other guy, that they're going to choose none of the above and lock me out of that market forever.
I don't see the mega clouds racing to build their own ASICs for switching. I'll certainly see them doing CPUs because they use such large numbers of CPUs, and having ARM CPUs replacing Intel CPUs seems to be very positive. Uses a lot less power, they run a lot faster, certainly for certain types of compute loads. The AWS ARM instances, last time I was looking at something, are about 40% cheaper than the Intel equivalent instances. So there's a substantial benefit there. But
This is
AWS
fine for
buys
those big companies. This is fine. But what I care about for the purposes of this conversation is the enterprise. That is, if I'm an enterprise, I bet on disaggregation and Whitebox. The Cumulus situation has probably screwed me unless I happen to be so fortunate as to have Mellanox switches in the rack. Ha ha, almost no one has that right now. Do I say, what do I do going back to my business and the stakeholders and saying, we bet on this political thing has happened. I'm sorry, we've got basically switches that are going to be antiquated because we can't keep up with them. I guess we go back to fiscal June.
I think if you were betting on disaggregation for whatever reason, then the next step would be, okay, now I need to take a very close look at Sonic and maybe Dell's recently released for the enterprise Sonic version, because that seems to be the next network operating system that's sort of making a play outside of the cloud niche that it could come in toward the enterprise.
And there'll be more distributions of Sonic coming, I suspect.
Is the Sonic distribution protected from what Broadcom has done here in this anti-NVIDIA play?
I mean, legally Broadcom can do whatever it wants, but the fact that Sonic came out of Microsoft for its Azure cloud, they built it so that they could have their own network operating system to run their cloud. If Broadcom were to say, we're killing Sonic, then they would be essentially giving Microsoft the finger, which would be stupid. So
so Sonic uses SI, switch abstraction interface. And in theory, Broadcom has licensed its technologies that SI is using. My not very good understanding of this situation is that there are functions in the ASIC that the SDK exposes, and you have to have a license to them. And as a simple concept, and this is how it was explained to me, so I'm repeating what I was told, which is at arm's length, is that there are advanced functions in the ASIC that you'll never get access to unless you're a Broadcom licensee. And the features that are exposed in the SAI abstraction layer, which allows you to be agnostic of the underlying silicon, doesn't necessarily let you access all of the advanced functions in the silicon. Is that a problem? Well, if you're somebody like Abstra, for example, no, it's not, because you're really just using the layer 3 forwarding, doing some EVPN, some VXLAN tagging, and the answer is no. Sonic on Marvell Prestera or the Innovium Terralinks, or whoever's silicon it is happens to be underneath, starts to get more abstracted. But today it's still nascent. Sonic is still mostly built for and mostly tested against Broadcom chips. So swings and roundabouts, I think.
The other thing you're going to have to run into when you see this, though, is kind of like you said, Greg, and this is a thing that we've seen in a lot of different vendors. We're going to give you baseline support through an API for free or for a very small licensing fee. But if you want access to these really cool acceleration features that are under the hood, you're going to have to pay us for those. Well, nobody likes to pay without the promise of getting the money back. So those typically become like your advanced feature license things. If Broadcom continues to do this and they only partner up with a couple of companies that are allowed to access this, and then, we're going to sell this as the super fast flagship thing, they're going to price themselves out of the market, because nobody's going to want to look at this and go, well, I can have, Cumulus for pennies, or I can have, Broadcom OS for $100 bills per switch, and it only gives me a 5% speed increase. I'm going to pay pennies.
Well, you hit on a takeaway there, which is Broadcom's doesn't see the enterprise as a market, or if it is a market, it's not one that it cares much about. And in the course of my research on the Cumulus, Mellanox, NVIDIA, Broadcom topic, it's clear that Cisco, for example, has been having head-to-head fights with Broadcom over the last 3 or 4 years. So it's not like Broadcom even wants to let itself be bullied around by Cisco, who would be a substantial buyer. And I've heard stories that Cisco actually sells more Innovium ASICs than it does Broadcom ASICs now, because there's a bit of a trick in there, in that it's got a lot to do with what products are being sold in volume, not to do with where the products are sold to. Does that make sense? So there's a version of Cisco that sells switches Whitebox to large cloud companies, and they may have Innovium chips into them, whereas it uses Broadcom chipsets in some product lines. It has its own chipsets in other product lines. So the total consumption of Broadcom isn't a lot, but apparently Cisco and Broadcom have been going head to head over the last 3 years too. So it doesn't necessarily think the enterprise market is actually all that valuable to it.